Oh, wake up, rethink the status quo. When you get your money right, then you're the one who runs your life. Come build a wealthy spirit with Sammy and Michelle.
I was filling up my water bottle, aka Greenie, today, and I had a moment of reflection. There I was at the sink, filling up my water bottle with tap water, and I was remembering that 1 year ago, my life was very different.
I know what you mean, Sammy, because I was with you, where we couldn't drink tap water, where we couldn't cook with tap water. Do you know what it's like to have to make pasta with bottled water, and all you can think about is how you're wasting your drinking water on pasta, and then you dump it all out, and you're like, what if a storm comes into town because this town cannot handle a storm, and then we're trapped, and then we can't get drinking water? All that to say, life is very different now.
Lovely place, but things have changed. The wheel of fortune has turned for us. Things are going well. It was nice to be able to look back at that and think, wow, what a drastic change. 1 year ago, I was working full-time, constantly stressed. I was looking through my photos and I see all these orders and things that I had to do, stat with the dysfunctional hospital, not my clinic, that was a great place to work. Everything was chaotic. That's just how it is when you're working sometimes. But I remember that after watching Tony Robbins' documentary, I Am Not Your Guru, I remember thinking, I created my entire reality. And I looked around and I'm like, this is a reality where I have no time for myself. And I decided to make a drastic change. This year, 1 year from then, everything is completely different. I get to exercise every day, multiple times a day. I get to take a walk every day where I get to listen to spiritual content. I feel like I'm having a spiritual evolution. My entire world is changing, and I can attribute some of that to myself, which is really gratifying.
And that gratification comes from taking time to pause and do a mid-year review, which Sammy and I are going to talk about today.
Let's get into it.
But first, the value of a pause, the value of a transition, the value of a sabbatical is so powerful, which I wanted to introduce. We are bringing back a second cohort, we being Toby and I, of our sabbatical course. We just had our reunion last week, and it was so amazing to hear about the different projects, experiments, fun activities, travel that people in our cohort were doing. They were doing everything from taking chocolate making classes, marrying people at City Hall, volunteering, creating think tanks, starting YouTube videos and channels, day trading. The list goes on. And it was so cool to hear how taking a sabbatical, taking a pause, taking some time to work through that transition really allowed them to play and really figure out what it was that brought them alive in life. So Toby and I are so excited to do the second cohort of our sabbatical course. Click the link in our show notes for more information. If you have a friend who will be transitioning out of work into a work break, share the link with them. Let us know if you do. We would love to answer any kind of questions that come up. Thank you so much.
Now back to today's topic, the mid-year review.
Here's the thing. Sammy and I, we were talking to a friend of ours, Karinka, and we were talking about our intentional living group. And she reminded us to look backwards. We focus so much on how can we improve our lives? How can we go to the next goal, the next step? And she was like, sometimes it helps to pause and go back and think about how far you've come, the good, the bad, everything in between. So Sammy and I, we love this idea, and we wanted to do a proper mid-year review. Why say reviews for the end of the year, aka my birthday? I think July, if you're listening to this when this comes out, or whatever point you are, it's always helpful to take a step back and go and review how things are going.
Now, when it came to review, there was only one person we can turn to for advice on how to do this, and that is Tim Ferriss. Tim Ferriss, author of The 4-Hour Workweek and other life-changing books, host of the Tim Ferriss Show, is the guru when it comes to creating these kind of frameworks.
Yes, we found his piece, Forget New Year's Resolutions and Conduct a Past Year Review Instead, which we used as a framework for this episode. So we are going to go through his steps, which we applied for our mid-year review, and then talk about what stood out for us in our specific review.
First, Tim recommends creating 2 columns, a positive and negative column. Then you go through your previous year week by week. For me, I used Google Photos to help me do this. You can use your notes, you can use a calendar that you have, whatever reflects your previous year. And write down what were the positive events in the positive column and what was negative in the negative column.
I definitely recommend going through the effort of actually pulling out your photos, pulling out your calendar, because a lot of times big things will stick out to us, like that big good thing or that big bad thing. But there are so many tiny moments, like getting a haircut, that I was like, oh, that was a positive moment, actually. And I'm glad this sparked that memory. So pull out your calendar, pull out your photos. Don't just rely only on your memory.
Next, go through each column and highlight the 20% that was the most positive and the 20% that was the most negative.
After that, look for patterns. On the positive side, are there any commonalities between those peak happiness moments? On the negative side, are there certain patterns or certain things that created those bad moments, the moments that brought you down? I actually went through with a highlighter and highlighted those moments.
We have multiple highlighters of multiple colors because that's the kind of people we are. So yeah, we used one color for the positive column, another color for the negative column. It was very fun.
Tammy just wants to share how many highlighters we have, which we almost never use. This was at a moment where I appreciated that we have basically a school supply closet in our island.
Lastly, Tim recommends going into your future, looking at your calendar going forward, and adding more of those positive style type events and keeping a list of all the negative things and trying to avoid adding those.
He said, put it on the calendar because we do not prioritize the things that bring us happiness. And with the negative things, he actually has a list that's like, avoid these things. And I like that because, yeah, we need a reminder. We create our own reality, as Tony Robbins says. And sometimes we need to remember that those negative things that keep coming up, maybe we can work around those things.
You know what was on both mine and Michelle's positive list?
I didn't know you were peeking.
It was Camp Fi.
Yes! Shout out to any Camp Fi friends listening to this.
Camp Fi was just a great experience because you get to meet all these like-minded people and have intimate connections with them, like small groups, one-on-one conversations. Also, you learn so much while you're there because these were all people who were into financial independence and they were walking the path. So they had all kinds of tips, ideas, similar struggles. It was just so fun to be with all those people.
A takeaway from me, Sammy, with that was I noticed there was a pattern that when I was with people that I really enjoyed being with, I found very stimulating, small groups of friends. I loved those events. I love even just when my friends visited. There were a few times on my list that popped up. So that was a really great note for me. Okay, one, Camp Fi is something we can literally put on our calendar next year, but also enjoy the time that I have friends, grab at those opportunities, especially Camp Fi. Obviously, we're new people we're meeting, but people in Charleston that we're getting to know. Our friends here, our Deep Talk group, our friends that we've met at Bliss, people in our yoga class, people in our cycling class. Like, it reminds me actually that those moments really bring me alive. More of that the rest of this year.
I noticed a specific pattern, which was I love being in intimate groups with people that I know or just getting to know. And I love learning things. And if there's something that combines those, like Camp Fi, I realize that in my life, anytime there's a situation where I'm learning things with a bunch of people who I feel close to, I am the happiest camper.
Another thing for me, Sammy, on the positive was my sabbatical course launched this year. That went really well. My work in general, working with Rite of Passage, working with the online communities that I work with, I actually realized that I get a lot of joy from those things. And it made me appreciate how much I enjoyed creating something and bringing people together. And it reminded me, okay, I like working with these people. I like the work that I'm doing. And that's not a bad thing to lean into and to embrace when it comes up for me, because I'm at a point in my life where my work brings me a lot of joy.
Next was the negative column. One pattern I noticed with my negative column is that anytime I was in a situation where I really had to disappoint people, like when I was leaving my job, that last day of work, that was probably one of, if not like one of two worst days that I had in the past year. Like that feeling of having to let people down or hurt people, that's my least favorite feeling. And you might be thinking, well, that's not necessarily something you can deliberately avoid. But we got Tony in our ear. I had to think about it. And I do think there are ways to maybe make those situations happen less. And one way is by being very conscious of my own happiness and well-being. I think a lot of times if I was able to recognize my own unhappiness earlier, the disappointment wouldn't hurt so bad because I would be able to do it earlier.
I had a similar thing in that a pattern I noticed was having difficult conversations with people. Tough conversations. I think that was a big learning lesson for me this past year, but definitely in the past 6 months. It really forced me to have a lot more of integrity. It forced me to have a lot more courage. It required me, like to your point, to put myself first and be in tune with my own needs and to be able to articulate that and not avoid those things. And I agree with you, Sammy. Maybe it's difficult to quote unquote avoid those things, but one, I was proud of myself. I was like, you know what, actually, like these are negative things. But one, the positive list still outweighs the negative. And two, anytime that I'm being true to my feelings, and the sooner I can recognize that, those tough conversations are difficult, but actually they were always worthwhile. And it was always worthwhile to put myself first. So I think maybe just also not suffering so much before those moments and setting good boundaries too, so that before there are problems, I can be in tune with myself and say, hey, this is something that's good for me versus this is something that I'm doing for other people.
One thing that was within my control that annoyed me was trying to be on social media. For a brief period after I stopped working, I thought I'll try to be on social media more and activate our accounts a little bit more. Let me tell you, this did not bring me any joy. I hate everything about it. I hate planning videos. I hate taking videos. I hate being on those apps all the time. I hate being indoors. Everything about it just seems terrible to me, which is good to know. I did stop that pretty quickly, and seeing that on the list reminded me not to pick that up again.
Another negative one for me, Sammy, was I ran into different health problems this year, which when you are unhealthy, some things are out of your control, but sometimes I realize, I haven't been exercising, I haven't been eating properly, I haven't been sleeping properly, I haven't been drinking water. It's all of a sudden you have a list of things and you're like, which of these things made me sick? And you're like, maybe I'm not taking care of myself. And it is in those moments when I'm have a fever and I'm in bed, or I really feel like I'm suffering from sickness, that 2 weeks later, I appreciate being healthy and I appreciate how draining that experience was. So I think this also reminded me that it's good to put my health first and to be cognizant of when I'm neglecting my basic needs, because it's a domino that just keeps going. And next thing you know, I'm on the couch for a week and I'm sick and I have a fever and I can't get anything done. It's just a pile of suckness.
So true, Michelle.
Takeaways.
Takeaways for this episode. Number 1, do a mid-year review. Make a list. What was the positive? What was the negative? Highlight the top 20% and incorporate more positive, and try to avoid the negative as much as you can.
Sammy, I think 2024, for a lot of people, myself included, was a surprisingly tough year, and we're only halfway through it. However, making this list, one of the unexpected things was, yes, some things that were sucky, some things that were bad. It felt like the strength of that experience was negative, but listing it all out, I was like, actually, there's so many positive things. And it's not I'm just taking little things I got my hair cut. That made me happy. I'm there were so many people we met. We moved out of this crazy desert town. We, like you said, are exercising more. Just made me appreciate how much I'm so grateful for my life today. And I think a mid-year review anytime you can stop and pause and reflect, I hope that you're at a place too where you can look back and say there are a lot of good things as well.
Community time!
Before we say goodbye, it's our community time. And I don't know if you've noticed, the quality of Michelle's mic is greatly improved, which is why our first shout out is going to go to Tamara, because she sent us a pledge on our newsletter, and that is going directly to this microphone fund. So thank you. And she wrote a lovely comment on our How to Retire Like a Rockstar episode. She said, love this episode particular. I feel hopeful that I can now retire better with more confidence. Thanks so much for all your thoughts. Also, I love your mom for tuning me and other coworkers to your podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you to many of my mother's coworkers. CMO, Chief Marketing Mom Officer. She's killing it. She keeps telling us that people are coming to her and letting her know how much she's loving it. And thank you, Tamara, specifically for sending us a little pledge. We really appreciate it, and for leaving us this comment.
Paulin Harris also commented that they liked our episode on uncertainty. They really liked the phrase, the opposite of uncertainty is presence. Paul sent a mind-blown emoji with that. I like that one a lot too. I think presence surprisingly fixes everything.
I agree. That was a great reminder of a lovely quote that we pulled for that episode. Shout out to Lucca. He said he enjoyed the episode. Forwarded it to his boo, Blaithin.
Karinka, the inspiration for this podcast, said she was listening to multiple of our episodes on the plane, including the net worth episode, and she found it to be lighthearted despite being about a financial topic.
Shout out to Alex Michael. We caught up and he told me that he had been listening to the podcast. He popped on the Byron Katie episode, and as all of us do with the Byron Katie technique, found it to be simple and yet so effective. So really appreciate that feedback, Alex. Also, shout out to Kendall Brown. We will share, she wrote a piece and she referenced 2 of our podcast episodes, actually. She listened to the episode with Doc G. She got his book, Taking Stock, which we loved. So love to see her quote that book in her piece. And also she mentioned Coast-Fi, which she heard from our podcast.
When I saw that Kendall was transformed by learning about Coast-Fi, I was like, you know what? This entire podcast has been worth it.
She literally said that to me. Kendall, thank you for including it in the footnote. Sammy said, if one person learned about Coast-Fi because of our podcast, this whole thing has been worth it. Which is a very powerful statement because, sometimes we're sitting here, we're editing the podcast, we got to get a new mic, even though the old one did last a long time. And it's those type of quotes, these type of support, these comments that really, really bring us alive. buildawealthyspirit.com. You can always let us know. Also, final shout out to our Law of Attraction group, David and Anne. We know you guys are listening and we really, really appreciate it. We love that group. We love the Bliss Spiritual Co-op. If you're in Charleston, you should definitely check them out.
And most importantly, be sure to join us next time as we put down the rule book and we rethink the status quo.